Bleach and Jujutsu Kaisen are two series that have quite a bit in common. As a massive fan of Tite Kubo, Gege has made it pretty clear that Bleach contributed quite heavily to his approach with storytelling in Jujutsu Kaisen. This is something that has not gone unnoticed, and I've even made videos in the past highlighting these similarities. But one parallel that I've recently noticed due to the anime's adaptation of Gojo's sealings and the events in the Jujutsu Kaisen manga is that Gojo and Aizen, some of the strongest characters in their respective series, are very similar in nature. The direction of their characters, the trials that they face as nearly unparalleled beings, and even how they get dealt with in their manga are all very interesting things about them. So in this video, I'll be highlighting those similarities, discussing the common themes of these two characters, and generally just showing some love and appreciation for Gojo Satoru and Sosuke Aizen. If you are familiar with Bleach and Jujutsu Kaisen respectively, I'm sure that you're aware of the general portrayal of these two characters and the broad strokes of both Gojo and Aizen's personalities. Gojo for the most part is demonstrated to be a very whimsical, jovial, and light-hearted jokester, with the capacity to cut loose, get serious, or get crazy if need be. Comparatively, Aizen is cold, calculating, cunning, and also playful, albeit in a much more cruel and demeaning way than Gojo. At a first glance, you would only be able to recognize their pretty harsh personality differences. While they do share some semblance of commonality due to them both being top tiers in their verse, outside of that, they differ quite a bit, and this wouldn't be an entirely incorrect assessment to make regarding their characters. Gojo and Aizen's surface level personalities are as different as night and day. However, what's particularly interesting about both of these characters and their differing personas is that they serve a very similar purpose. They both act as covers for a very deep-rooted sense of loneliness and isolation. Gojo and Aizen go about hiding these feelings in entirely different ways, but both characters use the illusion of control and confidence to hide the doubt that lies beneath that. For Gojo, this is rather clear and stated pretty objectively at numerous points in the story. His desire to foster a younger generation of powerful sorcerers like him is in part to overturn a very conservative and backwards ideology held by the higher-ups, but it's also to relieve him of the burden of solitude, the solitude that comes with being known as the strongest. His happiest moments come from his time as a teenager, and the reason for this specifically is that at the time he had a rival. He had another person who could stand with him as an equal and share the title of the strongest. Because of Suguru Geto, Gojo wasn't isolated due to his strength. That changed, however, after his awakening and the defection of his friend. The events of the end of Hidden Inventory forced Gojo to come to grips with his power in an overarching sense once more, and that realization put him on an island. It forced him to become painfully aware of the curse that is associated with strength. His solution to this problem, it was quite literally to create sorcerers who he could view as an equal. Now, if you're a Bleach fan, and more specifically someone who is a big fan of Aizen, this should somewhat ring a bell for you. Creating a being to match and understand you, even if only subconsciously, is exactly what Aizen was doing when he constructed Ichigo and manipulated aspects of his life until their final battle. This isn't to say that Aizen did this intentionally, knowingly, or even out of the kindness of his own heart. In fact, in the story, it's made rather clear just how unaware he was of his deepest desires, but they were there nonetheless. This also isn't to say that Gojo is grooming a student with malicious intent in the same way that Aizen was with Ichigo. Rather, it's simply noting an objective similarity between the two. Gojo and Aizen are both strong, ridiculously so. This much is clear and uncontested. What's also clear is that they dedicated large portions of their lives to creating something that could contest the incontestable. The power that rivaled the heavens, the power that changed the world at birth, the power that transcended logic and thought was also the power that brought these two immense suffering and torment. This takes us back to what I mentioned earlier. Their personalities, their personas, while being extremely different, serve the purpose of assisting them in the creation of beings who can understand them, but it's also simply a way of dealing with the unimaginable weight of the cross that they must bear. Now, I don't say this to say that Gojo and Aizen in actuality are not at all what they portray themselves to be, but it is to argue that they are not only their facade, they are not only what they show to the world, they are not only what they show to other characters in their story. Anime characters, and honestly, popular fictional characters in general, suffer from being flanderized by their fans. Whatever core character trait or set of related traits sticks out tends to get highlighted and really hammered into the ground as the only aspect of them that matters. Gojo and Aizen are two pretty egregious examples of this actually, in part due to the ambiguity of their writing, but also just in part due to their popularity within their stories. Gojo and Aizen are both some of the most popular and well-regarded characters within Jujutsu Kaisen and Bleach respectively, and for good reason. Now, I'm not sure if Gege and Kubo meant to do that with them as a meta commentary both on the audience's perceptions of certain characters, but also an analysis of how the people in the story feel, or if this is just a happy accident that results in a really interesting phenomenon. But either way, something super fascinating happens when people outside of the story over-index on one aspect of Gojo or Aizen. You see, in the narratives of Jujutsu Kaisen and Bleach, these two can't be understood by most of the cast. They simply can't relate to them and vice versa. I mean, if you've never experienced what it's like to transcend the limits of your entire universe, how could you possibly hope to understand someone who has done that? And if you've never experienced true weakness, true fear, true helplessness, what could you hope to gain from those who are confronted with those feelings every single day? Just as God in many forms of religion is said to be beyond the understanding of human beings, Gojo and Aizen are beyond the understanding of the characters that exist within their world. This leads to the people in the narrative misattributing their actions. It leads to misunderstandings that could easily be resolved if everyone were standing on even footing. This makes any viewer flanderization particularly poignant in the case of these two. When we as the audience also fail to understand both characters, misunderstand the core themes that they represent, or limit them to what we could possibly grasp with our minds, we are doing the exact same thing that the characters within the stories are. We become the proof for Gojo and Aizen that nobody can understand beings that lie beyond a certain point. This may sound a bit far-fetched, but just think about the language used with these characters in moments of hype. Gojo, in a moment of pure elation, compares himself to Buddha, and Aizen explicitly says that he himself not only understands how kings and gods are born, but that he has taken that path himself. Neither really consider themselves in the same dimensions as their would-be peers, and why should they? No thing that they had ever come across could hurt them, and in Aizen's case specifically, he considers himself literally in an entirely different dimension than Hollow, Shinigami, and human beings. What we are to fictional characters, Aizen is to the Bleach universe. Once again, a degree of separation is established as the natural order, and the only way to break that is through these godlike beings deciding to interfere and intervene with the fates of those who have potential. Normally, they would never be able to obtain the transcendent power that these two have, but if it's Gojo and Aizen leading the way, if it's these two godlike entities, they can take these pieces of coal that surround them and transform them into diamonds worthy of being viewed. The resolution to their loneliness is an integral part of their character, but it can't be understated just how coded their isolation is into their very being. If you want another example of this, just take a look at Gojo and Aizen's primary abilities, specifically Infinity and Kyoka Suigetsu. The ability that stops anyone from ever reaching you, and the ability that stops anyone from ever perceiving you. In both manga, the power systems are meant to be a reflection of who you are as a person. Your Zanpakuto is an extension of your soul, and your curse technique an interpretation of it, meaning that both Gojo and Aizen's techniques are a direct commentary on their state of being and a reflection of who they are. With this knowledge, do these not sound like the abilities of two characters tormented by the power they were granted, tormented by the fact that no matter what they do, they will never be understood? If they make an effort, Gojo and Aizen from a power system perspective literally cannot be perceived or touched by those around them. A difference in their methods is shown in how they fight, but the outcome is strikingly similar. Rather than manipulate and trick those beneath him in order to affirm his dominance, Gojo simply puts up a wall between him and everyone else. His personality is an embodiment of that, but so is the actual infinite space that his technique brings into reality. Aizen doesn't necessarily brute force his opponents as often, and technically, you can touch him, but very in line with his character, he distorts your senses, your awareness, your perception of yourself and everything around you, and his ability to do so puts him on the level of a deity. Despite their differences, despite the different methods in which they go about it, the end result for Gojo and Aizen is total isolation. Even the way in which both characters are dealt with are pretty similar. Gojo is sealed in Shibuya because his strength is so overwhelming that the antagonists literally cannot enact their plans with him around, nor can they actually kill him, leaving only a sealing option on the table. And Aizen is sealed after being weakened in his fight with Ichigo because that was the only moment that he could actually be detained. The veil of invincibility is not drawn off for either character here because they are only sealed due to their overwhelming strength. Even in defeat, the power they wield is self-evident, and rather than being released from their internal prison, they are just trapped externally as well, tucked away without the hope of existing with another. The physical realization of what has been going on for them internally is manifested in the way they lose, leaving them in an even worse position than they were before. When they are unsealed from their prison, it is once again for the sake of their power. Aizen is unsealed to help in the fight against the Quincy, and Gojo is unsealed to essentially fix all of the problems that had accumulated in the world during his absence. Eventually, both characters do seem to experience their own forms of release, closure, or embracement from another being, but that dives into manga spoiler territory for both Bleach and Jujutsu Kaisen. If you want to avoid that, skip to this time code. But otherwise, let's talk about the solutions to Gojo and Aizen's loneliness presented in their respective manga. Discussing Aizen and Gojo's overarching narrative and power purposes always leaves a pretty massive elephant in the room in regard to them being lonely because of their strength. The elephant only exists here really because Gojo and Aizen aren't the strongest characters in the series. They're both pretty close to that, but Yuha, arguably Ichigo, and Sukuna both pretty clearly eclipse the two aforementioned characters, and in theory could water down the presented ideas in this video, but especially in the case of Gojo, the existence of a stronger character does the exact opposite of that. Something similar happens with Aizen and his story, but much earlier in the overarching narrative of Bleach, and we actually get to see his story continue well after his defeat as well. In Gojo's case, the resolution is relatively straightforward and spelled out to us. Sukuna was stronger than Gojo, and because of this, he was able to defeat him and give him the fight of his life, rather than being a lesser creature that he couldn't relate to. From Gojo's perspective, he had found an equal, or someone even beyond his abilities. In both a literal and figurative sense, he found someone that could cross the infinite distance between him and the rest of the world. With this, Gojo was able to die happily. He was able to be fulfilled with the knowledge that in the end, he wasn't alone. He was freed from the shackles of solitude that strength had put on him. Through defeat, Gojo had found solace. Aizen's journey, or rather the resolution to his journey, is quite a bit different. The two characters take a similar road of loneliness to get to this point, but it is with their respective conclusions where this road splits. When sacrificing all of his Shinigami powers to obtain his Dangai and Mugetsu form, Ichigo is able to completely overwhelm Aizen. Clashing his blade allowed him to sense Aizen's seclusion, but in the end, it wasn't Ichigo's power that was able to defeat him. While he was certainly the more powerful character during their bout, this last-ditch effort power ran out, while the Hogyo seemed to evolve until it granted Aizen his wish of losing, thus allowing him to be sealed. Aizen faced defeat because he faced someone more powerful than him, but unlike Gojo, the defeat in itself didn't provide Aizen with an answer. It didn't provide Aizen with comfort, and most importantly, this loss didn't provide him a way out of the cage of loneliness. We see him wailing and screaming at Kisuke Urahara to answer him and to explain himself as he's being sealed, demonstrating that he hasn't quite come to grips with the fact that he lost, and he certainly has not accepted everything that comes with it. This comes later, as at the end of the series, we get a monologue from Aizen, criticizing the world that Yuha wanted to create and highlighting the purpose of courage, the concept that no one in Bleach personifies more than Kurosaki Ichigo. When he's saying this, he's still sealed, imprisoned in Muken, and because of the Hogyoku fusing with him, he can't truly even die and be released from this hell. But based on his attitude towards courage conceptually and the softness in which he mentions it, I think it's safe to say that witnessing Ichigo overcome trial after trial in instilled something within him, specifically overcoming the fate manipulation that Yuha had been able to imbue into his almighty. Probably demonstrated to Aizen that what he needed wasn't power and wasn't companionship, but it was courage. At the end of the story, his power still exists, his loneliness still exists, but what he gained after facing Ichigo was the courage to exist in spite of it. In this moment, Aizen isn't redeemed or absolved of his crimes against the Soul Society, but he certainly is saved by the main character of the story and made a more complete person because of it. He definitely doesn't get the fulfillment that Gojo does at the hands of Sukuna. He doesn't get to escape his torment through death, but being given hope through Ichigo's ability to persevere was the way that I think Aizen's journey with loneliness concluded. Unlike before, he's no longer so fearful of his loneliness that he must rebel against the Soul Society to fix that fact. Regardless of the underlying discomfort and fear that may come with his existence, Aizen continues to live on because that is all that he can do. Existing in spite of the fear that comes with living is exactly the kind of courage that was taught to him by his better, by the stronger Shinigami. Gojo Satoru and Sosuke Aizen are two prolific examples of strength and loneliness in manga. They aren't the only characters who explore this idea in anime and manga by any means. In fact, Gojo isn't even the only character in his story who has this ongoing theme, but they are definitely some of the most popular to do so and some of my favorites, so I wanted to make a video highlighting and praising them. I've done a ton of videos like this breaking down and analyzing couples or groups of characters with similar traits, so feel free to check out this playlist if you want to see more. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to be notified when I upload, and I'll see you in the next one.